Welcome, wanderer of the night, to Sleepy Historian, where time itself slows to a whisper. If you find comfort in quiet voices, in the gentle rhythm of forgotten stories, you've come to the right place. This is boring history for sleep. Soft-spoken history documentary, calm bedtime storytelling, and relaxing history to fall asleep to. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Let me know softly in the comments where you're listening from and what time is right now. It's strangely comforting to know that somewhere out there, others are drifting into dreams beside the same slow river of history. So dim the lights. Let your body sink into stillness. Let the gods whisper as the myths unfold. Tonight, we travel to the sands of ancient Egypt, a place of golden horizons and endless silence. A place where gods wore the heads of animals, and stories shaped the rhythm of life and death. You may think of Egypt as a land of pharaohs, pyramids, and shimmering heat, but beneath all that grandeur lies a world of quiet devotion and curious contradictions. Myths that are strange, sacred, and at times beautifully absurd. The myths we'll explore tonight are not told for excitement. They are told for stillness, their edges softened by time, their meanings drifting like incense in a temple corridor. You may find yourself fascinated, or you may find yourself slowly slipping away into dreams. Either is perfectly fine. Over the next 2 hours, we'll wander gently through 4 ancient chambers of thought. First, we'll step into the daily life of those who lived under the gaze of the gods, exploring how ordinary Egyptians worshipped, feared, and found comfort in divine order. Then, we'll drift into a biography, or perhaps a legend, of one of Egypt's most mysterious gods, tracing the story of Osiris and the strange, tranquil rhythm of his death and rebirth. In our third chapter, we'll linger in the cool shadow of archaeology and mystery, unearthing how the sands preserved these stories and how we slowly rediscovered them. And finally, we'll visit the realm of the elite, the pharaohs and priests, those who spoke to the gods directly, and those who ruled in their name, living both in splendor and in silence. Throughout this journey, we'll avoid the noise of battles and drama. Instead, we'll listen to the soft crackle of torches in dark halls, the hum of the Nile at night, and the eternal stillness of the desert sky. Imagine yourself there, lying beneath the soft stars of the ancient world, the distant murmur of water nearby, the sand still warm beneath your body. Above you, the gods look down, falcon-headed, jackal-faced, their eyes unreadable, timeless. You feel small, and yet somehow safe, another soul in the endless flow of history. So breathe slowly. Let your thoughts wander and your body rest. This is history told not for the mind, but for the soul, for falling asleep to boring history. And now, as the night deepens, we begin our story of the shocking, gentle myths of the Egyptian gods and goddesses. Imagine yourself waking slowly into the soft, muted light of an ancient Egyptian dawn. The air is still cool, carrying the faintest hint of moisture rising from the nearby Nile. The village around you rests in a gentle quiet, only now beginning to stir. Roosters call with a distant, sleepy rhythm, and somewhere down the narrow lane, a slow rustle of woven reed mats signals the beginning of another day. Life in this world moves with a steady, predictable cadence, not hurried, not idle, but guided by the rhythms of nature and the steady gaze of the gods. For ordinary Egyptians, these gods are not distant figures, but constant companions. Each sunrise is considered a quiet triumph, a moment of renewal granted by Ra, the sun god, as he completes his nightly journey through the underworld. Each breath of wind is a reminder of the unseen presence of Ammonius. Each stretch of fertile land reminds everyone of Osiris, the gentle ruler of life and rebirth. As you step outside, the colors of dawn settle over the fields. The mud brick houses glow faintly, their rounded edges softened by centuries of methodical rebuilding after each flooding season. You can smell the damp earth, rich, dark, and full of promise after the Nile's annual rise. Life depends on this silt, on this simple, quiet gift delivered each year. There is a serenity in knowing that your world is shaped by cycles older than memory. The first tasks of the morning are unremarkable but comforting. People gather along the riverbank, washing sleep from their eyes in the slow-moving water. Their linen garments ripple softly in the current. Nearby, a farmer leads his cattle to drink, murmuring a small prayer under his breath. Not because he fears divine punishment, but because speaking to the gods feels as natural as speaking to the river itself. Life here is woven tightly into the spiritual world, not with grand rituals, but through small, quiet gestures repeated day after day. Inside the home, you hear the rhythmic grinding of grain. A woman kneels beside a flat stone, slowly working wheat into fine flour. The movement is almost meditative, gentle motion perfected over generations. There is no rush. Bread will be made when it is made. Meals are simple, often onions, cucumbers, coarse bread, and beer brewed lightly enough to drink throughout the day. Even this small domestic act is connected to a goddess. Women grinding grain sometimes hum softly to please Hathor, the deity of joy, motherhood, and music. Children run in short, playful bursts, their laughter softened by distance. They were little more than thin linen when young, the heat of the sun making clothing optional for many. The sand beneath their feet is cool for now, holding the night's last breath. They chase each other past clay jars, past palm baskets, and small shrines tucked into doorways. Shrines dedicated to Bess, the protector of households, who watches over mothers and little ones. Bess is not grand or fearsome. He is squat, almost comical in appearance. But to these families, he is a comforting figure, a guardian who scowls at dangers unseen. As the sun climbs, the fields awaken fully. Farmers walk carefully along the edges of irrigation canals, guiding water into neat furrows. The tools they use are simple: wooden hose, baskets, ropes, and woven scoops. Yet through these tools, they shape life itself. The land responds to their gentle discipline, offering barley, emmer wheat, flax for linen, and reeds for mats. This work is steady, repetitive, and strangely soothing. Even at its most difficult, it is never rushed. Nature cannot be rushed. The Nile does not hurry, and neither do its people. Over the fields, the sacred ibis walks slowly, dipping its curved beak into the moist earth. To the Egyptians, this bird is not merely an animal. It is associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. Everyday encounters like this blur the boundaries between mortal and divine. A farmer seeing an ibis might pause just for a moment, acknowledging the presence of something greater, yet familiar. At the marketplace, the atmosphere is soft and unhurried. Vendors arrange figs, clay bowls, and small amulets carved from stone. The amulets are especially popular. Eyes of Horus, tiny statues of Taret, strings of beads meant to bring luck or protection. Every object, no matter how small, carries a story shaped by myth. But for the people here, these stories are not dramatic tales. They are quiet truths that live alongside them. Later in the morning, the heat begins to settle gently over the land. Shadows grow shorter, colors fade into a warm haze. People move more slowly now, speaking softly, conserving their energy for the long day ahead. The river becomes a place of refuge, its surface shimmering beneath the sun. Boats drift calmly down the current. Fishermen casting nets, traders transporting jars of oil or bundles of papyrus, priests traveling between temples. Inside the homes, the cool interiors offer shelter. Simple pottery lines the walls, each piece worn smooth from use. Cats weave through the rooms, tails curling lazily. These animals are beloved companions, but also sacred in their own quiet way. Symbols of protection, grace, and the goddess Batet. Their presence feels peaceful, as if the home itself breathes more easily when a cat curls into a corner. As the day moves forward, work continues in gentle waves. Tasks blend into each other: weaving, pottery, tending animals, storing grain. There is no sharp divide between labor and life. Everything is connected, everything part of a greater rhythm, the rhythm of the Nile, of seasons, of the gods themselves. In this everyday world, nothing is rushed, nothing is wasted. Each moment is lived with the calm assurance that life flows on, carried by forces far older and far steadier than any single person. Under the watchful eyes of the gods, life continues in soft, unbroken cycles. And as you breathe with this ancient world, you may feel your own thoughts slowing, your own pace settling. The quiet life of an ordinary Egyptian gently wraps around you, steadying your mind like the slow pulse of the river itself. As midday arrives over ancient Egypt, the world shimmers with stillness. The air trembles faintly with heat, and even the birds quiet their calls. Along the horizon, temples rise like islands of stone, their shapes softened by sunlight and sand. They stand not as places of mystery or fear, but as steady anchors in the flowing rhythm of daily life. Here, the divine is not a distant abstraction. It is the heartbeat of existence itself. Imagine yourself stepping onto the wide, sun-bleached steps of a temple dedicated to Ammonius Ra. The stones beneath your feet are warm, their edges worn smooth by centuries of bare footsteps. Incense drifts in faint, winding streams, a dry sweetness that clings to the air, mingling with the scent of dust and linen. You hear low murmurs from within, the soft chanting of priests, the rustle of reeds used in sweeping the floors, the quiet sound of footsteps echoing through long corridors. The temple is cool inside, its walls thick enough to hold the night's chill well into the day. Hieroglyphs stretch in endless rows along the stone, words not read, but felt. Each carved symbol carries weight, history, and the calm certainty of meaning. Depictions of gods cover every surface. Falcons in flight, jackals at watch, lotus flowers rising from still water. In this dim space, even light seems to move slowly, filtered through the faint smoke of burning resin. The daily rituals begin long before most have risen. Priests, heads shaved clean, move with quiet precision through the temple's innermost chambers. They wash the statues of the gods with water drawn from the Nile, dry them gently with linen cloth, and dress them in fresh garments woven from white flax. These gestures are not symbolic. They are acts of care. To the Egyptians, the gods are not distant ideals. They live within their statues, within the sacred images. Each offering, each movement, is part of a long conversation between mortal and divine. Outside the sanctuary, workers and assistants tend to the temple gardens. Papyrus plants grow tall in shallow pools. Date palms sway lazily above. The hum of bees fills the air, and the rhythm of life continues in silence. These gardens are not mere decoration. They're symbols of order, echoes of creation itself. The Egyptians believed the gods had once brought order to chaos, shaping the world as neatly as a gardener arranges soil and water. Every day's labor, every act of balance, mirrors that ancient act of creation. Later, as the sun begins to dip toward afternoon, the temple's outer courtyard fills with quiet life. Villagers arrive with offerings, small baskets of figs, jars of beer, tiny figurines carved from limestone. No one rushes. They wait patiently in the shade, murmuring to one another in low tones. When their turn comes, they bow their heads, offering their gifts in silence or with brief whispers, prayers for health, fertility, safe journeys. The priests receive the offerings with calm reverence, placing them upon low tables before the statues. To us, these rituals might seem repetitive, almost monotonous, but to those who live them, they were deeply reassuring. Repetition was not boredom, it was stability. In a world governed by the flooding of the Nile and the cycles of the moon, repetition meant life itself. Every sunrise, every offering, every whispered prayer confirmed that the world still followed its rightful course. That Ma'at, the principle of harmony and truth, still prevailed. Ma'at was not a goddess of thunder or storm. She was order itself, the invisible rhythm that guided the cosmos. Her symbol, the feather, represented lightness, balance, and truth. In the great judgment of souls, the heart of the deceased would be weighed against her feather. But long before death, Ma'at was lived daily. She was present in honest trade, in careful work, in a farmer's steady patience, and in the quiet respect shown to the gods. Children, even the youngest, learned her name early. They were taught to speak truthfully, to share fairly, to maintain calm within their homes. These were not grand moral lessons, but gentle reminders of the world's delicate balance. Life was fragile, yet enduring, always one breath away from the gods. By late afternoon, the light begins to soften again. The air cools, the Nile gleams gold, and the hum of daily activity fades into a tranquil rhythm. Along the riverbank, people gather for small evening rituals. Families set floating lamps upon the water, small flickering flames drifting slowly downstream. Each light carries a wish, a prayer, or a memory of the departed. The lamps move silently, a trail of stars upon the river. Somewhere far off, a temple drum beats a slow, measured rhythm. It is not loud, just enough to be felt like a distant heartbeat. This, too, is a form of prayer. To maintain sound, rhythm, and order is to keep the world in harmony. The gods do not demand fervor. They ask for constancy. As night approaches, you can almost feel the collective exhale of the land. The day's heat withdraws, leaving behind the scent of baked clay and faint incense. Fishermen pull their boats ashore. Animals return to pens. Children grow quiet. Across the vast stretch of Egypt, torches flicker to life, marking small circles of human warmth amid the cool desert night. And in every home, however humble, a small shrine gleams in the lamplight. A carved image, a painted eye, or perhaps a single feather symbolizing Ma'at. People bow their heads briefly before sleep, murmuring their thanks for another completed cycle of the sun. Tomorrow, they will wake again to the same tasks, the same prayers, the same measured flow of time. Nothing changes quickly here. The rhythm itself is sacred, and in that rhythm lies the calm, enduring heart of Egyptian life. A life watched, guided, and sustained by the quiet presence of the gods. As the soft blue of twilight settles over the land, Egypt exhales once more. The final hours of the day arrive not with haste, but with calm inevitability. The air cools gently, the sounds of work fade, and a faint scent of smoke drifts from hearths where evening meals are being prepared. It is the quiet hour, the hour when the day withdraws and the gods reclaim the world for themselves. Imagine yourself walking along the riverbank. The sky deepens to a muted violet, and the Nile moves with a slow, glassy motion, its surface touched by the last rays of the sun. The people you pass are unhurried, their steps measured, their voices soft. Some carry bundles of reeds. Others hold baskets of bread or small jars of oil. A few pause to wash their hands in the cool water before heading home. In the fading light, everything appears timeless, as though the same gestures have repeated here for thousands of years. Within the village, you can hear the steady murmur of families gathering together. Flickering oil lamps cast pools of warm light upon the clay walls. The shadows move slowly, revealing the patterns of daily life. Woven mats, clay jars, fragments of pottery used and reused, symbols of an existence that values continuity above all. Inside each home, the smallest of rituals unfolds. A short prayer before eating, a few grains set aside for the spirits of the ancestors, a quiet glance toward the household shrine. Dinner is simple, perhaps lentils, bread baked earlier in the day, onions, and a small jug of beer. There's laughter, but it is soft, subdued. People speak not to fill silence, but to keep each other company within it. Life is neither noisy nor hurried here. is steady, like the pulse of the earth itself. After the meal, the older ones share stories, not the grand myths of Ra's journey or Osiris's resurrection, but the gentler tales of daily miracles. A story about a fisherman who prayed for calm waters and found his nets full the next morning. A story about a mother who left bread for the goddess Tarit and saw her child healed of fever. These are not legends in the modern sense. They are reminders that the divine resides quietly in the ordinary. Each story reinforces the idea that the gods are not apart from life, but woven gently through it. Beyond the homes, the fields lie still beneath the growing night. The irrigation channels gleam faintly under the stars, their edges soft and dark. Somewhere in the distance, a herdsman calls to his cattle, the sound long and melodic. A breeze carries the smell of wet earth and cut reeds, the same scent that has risen from this river for millennia. Even the insects hum in a rhythm that feels ancient. When the moon rises, silver and unblinking, the temples begin their own quiet transformation. The day's rituals are complete, the statues redressed and sealed once more behind heavy doors. The priests move through the hallways with torches that throw long, trembling shadows along the carved walls. Their footsteps echo softly, blending with the faint buzz of insects and the distant sigh of wind through the palm trees. At this hour, the gods are believed to travel beyond the mortal realm. Ra sails through the underworld, confronting darkness. Osiris presides over the silent lands of the dead. The living do not disturb them. They simply acknowledge the balance of night and day, of life and the eternal beyond. You might picture yourself reclining beside the river, the stars reflected in the water like scattered shards of light. Somewhere far downstream, another village repeats the same pattern. Cooking fires, laughter, prayers, sleep. The sameness of it all is strangely comforting. Time, here, is not a straight line, but a circle endlessly returning to the same gentle rhythm. Birth, growth, work, rest, each phase guided by unseen hands. A young scribe sits near his lamp, tracing symbols into a roll of papyrus. His stylus moves with patient care, dipping in a black ink made from soot and oil. The story he records is not of war or conquest, but of crops, offerings, and rainfall, the daily records of temple life. Even writing itself feels like prayer, an act of preservation, an attempt to bring order to the fleeting. The steady scratch of the reed pen is a sound as ancient as breath. In the distance, the sound of a flute rises, a soft, wavering melody, played perhaps by a shepherd or a temple musician finishing the day's service. The tune drifts through the still air, looping and fading like the rhythm of the Nile itself. Music, for the Egyptians, was another form of connection, not performance, but devotion. To play was to honor harmony, to keep Ma'at alive and sound. Gradually, one by one, the lamps go out. The village settles into near-total darkness, broken only by the silver of the moon and the faint gleam of the river. Within each home, sleep comes easily. There are no clocks, no urgency, no interruption. Only the steady breathing of the earth and the soft assurance that tomorrow will begin again just as this day did. The people of ancient Egypt lived surrounded by symbols of eternity, pyramids, temples, stars, and sand. But their peace came not from contemplating forever, but from embracing the small certainties of each day. In the repetition of ordinary acts, they found meaning. In their humility before the natural world, they found balance. And in their unbroken cycles, they touched something eternal. Now imagine the quiet village fading from sight, the flicker of its last lamp extinguished, the ripples of the Nile flattening once more. What remains is stillness, a timeless stillness that lingers between worlds, the world of gods and mortals, of dream and waking. You may feel it even now, that gentle pull toward rest, toward silence. Like the Egyptians before you, you surrender to the rhythm of things that endure, trusting that the sun will rise again and the cycle will continue. Imagine, now, that we leave behind the soft rhythm of the villages and step into the realm of myth. Not abruptly, but as one might drift from waking into a dream. The same Nile flows beneath us, but its waters shimmer differently now, reflecting not the sun, but the quiet glow of eternity. Here, the gods walk beside the river. Here, the wind carries stories older than the pyramids themselves. Among the countless deities that shaped the Egyptian imagination, none is as quietly compelling as Osiris, Lord of life, death, and renewal. To speak his name is to enter a world of balance, of endings that are never final, of decay that becomes rebirth. He is not a god of vengeance or fire. He is a god of stillness, of gentle return, of eternal patience. In ancient Egyptian belief, Osiris once ruled the world of the living. He was said to have been a great king, wise, calm, and just. Under his reign, people learned the gifts of agriculture, the art of sowing grain, of measuring the floods, of living in harmony with the land. His kingdom was orderly and serene, guided by Ma'at, that same balance that holds the stars in place. It is said that wherever Osiris walked, the desert bloomed for a moment, and the air carried the scent of renewal. At his side stood Isis, his devoted wife and sister, the goddess of magic, motherhood, and eternal love. Together, they represented the harmony of nature, the nurturing and the renewing, the order and the compassion. They were adored not through fear, but through trust. Their myth carried the soft assurance that life, though fragile, is also endlessly resilient. But harmony, in every age, seems to invite envy. And so came Set, Osiris's brother, wild, chaotic, unpredictable as the storms of the desert. While Osiris ruled the fertile valley of the Nile, Set wandered among the empty wastes, the barren lands where the wind cut sharp against the dunes. Where Osiris was green and life-giving, Set was red and dry, his eyes said to gleam with the heat of the sun's fiercest fire. To the Egyptians, these brothers were not symbols of good and evil, but of the eternal tension between order and chaos, two forces that define the world in equal measure. Imagine a time when the river was high, when the field shone green under a mild sun. The people rejoiced, for Osiris had blessed them again with plenty. And in the midst of that abundance, Set's jealousy grew like a shadow stretching across the land. He began to plot, not in fury, but in quiet determination. He would not destroy Osiris's kingdom outright. He would undo its very heart. The ancient texts tell this story with calm inevitability, as if the gods themselves understood that the cycle required it. One evening, under the pale light of the moon, Set devised a plan both clever and cruel. He commissioned a beautifully crafted chest made of rare cedar, inlaid with gold and silver, polished until it shone like still water. He brought it to a grand feast and, with a smile that hid his purpose, invited all the guests to try lying inside. Whoever fit perfectly, he said, could have it as a gift. Each god tried, and each was too large or too small, until Osiris, with his quiet grace, lay down within. The chest closed around him like a sigh. In that instant, Set and his followers sealed it tight, poured molten lead along its edges, and carried it swiftly to the Nile. There, under the indifferent stars, they let it drift away. Osiris, silent within, carried down the river toward the sea. And yet, even this was not told as a story of violence or loss, but as a turning of the great wheel. The Egyptians did not see death as finality, but as transformation. Osiris's journey through the waters mirrored the sun's nightly descent, the passage from light into shadow, from life into rest. In this way, his myth became a comfort, the assurance that even in darkness, renewal waits quietly to begin again. Isis, in her grief, began to wander the land in search of him. Her steps traced the Nile's winding course, her tears said to swell its waters. Through papyrus thickets and temple ruins, through marsh and sand, she searched, her calm devotion unbroken by time or distance. In some tellings, even the birds guided her path, their wings whispering above the reeds, as if to remind her that the gods, too, must endure loss to create balance. As night deepens around us, imagine her by the water's edge, the moonlight silver on her hair, her hands brushing the reeds as she listens to the current. Somewhere, far downriver, the chest drifts unseen, carrying the silent king toward his next realm. The air hums softly with expectation. The story is not yet over, it is simply pausing, as all things must before renewal begins. And so the tale of Osiris continues, a story not of tragedy, but of gentle persistence. It reminds us that what disappears from sight is not lost. It only changes form, waiting patiently, as the Nile waits each year for its flood to return. Night deepens over the imagined Nile. The stars drift lazily above, their reflections scattered across the slow, endless surface of the river. The world of men sleeps, but in the silence, Isis continues her patient search. Her sandals whisper over sand and stone, her linen dress stirring faintly in the wind. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the chest containing Osiris moves with the current, a small, gleaming vessel in a vast, eternal stream. The Egyptians believed Isis's journey was not just the act of a devoted wife, but a reflection of the soul's persistence. That love itself, when steady and pure, could bridge the distance between life and death. In her search, she became more than a goddess. She became the living embodiment of devotion and faith. Each temple built to her echoed this patience. Halls filled with quiet offerings, incense rising like breath, and prayers spoken in low tones by women and men alike who sought comfort in her constancy. Imagine Isis reaching the delta, where the Nile splits into many twisting paths before meeting the sea. The air here is thick with mist and the sweet scent of reeds. Her eyes search the waterline, and there, caught among the branches of a tamarisk tree, she finds it. The chest, half buried in silt and roots, gleams faintly beneath the moonlight. She falls to her knees, not in despair, but in still relief. For she knows that even death is not the end, only a new beginning in another realm. With care and reverence, Isis opens the chest. Inside lies Osiris, silent, serene, his face peaceful as if merely asleep. The wind hushes around her. The gods are said to pause, watching from the still heavens above. She wraps him in linen, speaks his name softly, and vows to restore him. Her magic, patient, ancient, and bound to love, begins to work. But the myth does not flow as smoothly as her prayers. Set learns of her discovery, and his rage is as dry and violent as the desert wind. In his fury, he seizes the body of Osiris, tears it apart into many pieces, and scatters them across the land. The Egyptians spoke of this not as an act of cruelty, but as part of the inevitable disintegration that precedes renewal. To them, decay and creation were two faces of the same truth. Even the gods were not spared this cycle. So Isis begins her journey anew, quieter this time, slower, but no less determined. She travels the length of Egypt, gathering each part of Osiris's body from the places where Set had hidden them. Every discovery becomes a small act of resurrection, a moment of restoration. With each piece she finds, she hums softly, words of remembrance, weaving together the fragments of her beloved with care and hope. The story tells us that as she worked, the Nile rose higher, as though the river itself wept in sympathy. By the time she had gathered all but one part, her power was nearly spent. And yet, with the help of the god Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead, she completed the first great act of embalming. Together, they anointed the body of Osiris with oils, wrapped it in linen, and spoke sacred words that echoed like wind through the reeds. Thus began the Egyptian art of mummification, not as a grim necessity, but as an act of devotion, of remembrance, and of hope for eternity. When the ritual was complete, Osiris stirred. He did not return to the world of the living, for that world had moved on. Instead, he opened his eyes upon a new realm, the underworld, a place of shadow and peace. There, he became ruler of the dead, not as a tyrant, but as a caretaker. His kingdom was not one of fire or torment, but of judgment and renewal. Every soul that entered his presence was weighed with fairness, measured not by wealth or power, but by the lightness of the heart. And yet, even as Osiris took his place among the stars and shadows, his legacy endured. From his union with Isis came a son, Horus, the falcon-headed god, embodiment of the rising sun and the living king. Isis hid him among the marshes, where papyrus grew thick and the air hummed with insects. There she nursed him in secret, far from Set's gaze. The child's laughter mingled with the soft sounds of water and wind, carrying a promise of renewal. In time, Horus would rise, not in anger, but in rightful balance, to confront Set and reclaim the harmony his father had embodied. Their conflict, often imagined in dramatic terms, was understood by the Egyptians as symbolic, the struggle between chaos and order, between the shifting sands and the steady river. Each sunrise was Horus's victory, each sunset, Set's retreat. Neither could destroy the other, for both were necessary to keep the world turning. To this day, the story of Osiris and Isis remains one of the gentlest and most enduring myths in human memory. It does not thrill with thunder or fear, it soothes with its quiet certainty. Every loss, it tells us, carries within it the seed of renewal. Every ending, however sorrowful, contains the faint heartbeat of a new beginning. As you listen, imagine the Nile once more, calm, unbroken, moving through its eternal path beneath the stars. Somewhere within that slow current lies the memory of Osiris, the god who died, who was remembered, and who lives forever in the turning of the seasons and the steady pulse of the earth. In the hush of the night, even now, his story seems to whisper through the water, soft, unhurried, and eternal. The myth of Osiris does not end with the crowning of Horus or the downfall of Set. It continues, softly, endlessly, in the rituals, prayers, and quiet acts of remembrance that followed for thousands of years. In Egypt, every temple was a reflection of this story. Every offering, every chant, every flickering flame in the darkness was a retelling of that moment when life conquered silence, not with noise, but with steady endurance. Imagine standing in one of those temples, centuries after the first telling of the myth. The walls rise high above you, cool to the touch, carved with rows of hieroglyphs that gleam faintly in the torchlight. Priests move slowly between the columns, their linen robes whispering like wind through reeds. Each gesture is measured, each word spoken not for an audience, but for the balance of the universe itself. At dawn, when the horizon turns pale gold, they pour libations of cool water and speak the names of the gods. Osiris is called upon as the eternal ruler, the one who opens the way. Isis is invoked as she who knows the words, a goddess of magic and protection. And Horus, the living sun, is hailed as the visible face of divine order. For the Egyptians, the myth was never merely a story to be told. It was a pattern to be lived, a quiet assurance that death was only one part of a greater rhythm. When the Nile flooded, they saw the tears of Isis, mourning her lost husband. When the crops sprouted, they believed Osiris had returned once more to give life to the land. Even in their funerary rites, they echoed this cosmic repetition, the body washed, anointed, wrapped, and laid to rest in imitation of the god himself. These rituals were not grim or frightening. They were slow, deliberate, and filled with reverence. In the dim light of the tombs, the air heavy with the scent of oils and lotus, the priest spoke the opening of the mouth ceremony, a symbolic act that allowed the deceased to breathe again, to speak, to taste eternity. Every motion was precise, every phrase ancient. Time seemed to dissolve within the rhythm of their words. When the ceremony was complete, the tomb was sealed not as a prison, but as a threshold, Painted on the walls were scenes of green fields, flowing rivers, and the calm presence of Osiris upon his throne, waiting, patient, serene. To enter the afterlife was not to face terror, but to step into balance. The soul would stand before Osiris, its heart weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the divine principle of truth and harmony. If the heart was light, it passed onward into a land of eternal peace. If heavy, it faded into silence. Yet even that silence was part of the order, never cruel, simply final. And so the people lived in quiet faith, to farm the fields, to raise children, to speak kindly, to honor the gods. These were acts of cosmic alignment. Each sunrise was a victory of Horus, each sunset a retreat of Set, each season a slow turning of Osiris's eternal wheel. There was no need for haste, no expectation of divine reward. Peace lay not in conquest, but in continuity. Imagine now the yearly festival of Osiris at Abydos, one of the most sacred places in Egypt. Pilgrims arrived by boat from across the kingdom, their sails catching the warm desert wind. They carried small effigies of Osiris, carved from wood or shaped from clay and grain, wrapped delicately in linen and laid to rest in miniature tombs filled with seeds. Over the days that followed, the seeds sprouted, green life rising from the soft, dark soil, a living symbol of resurrection. At night, chants echoed along the riverbanks. Not songs of joy, nor of mourning, but something gentler, a low, rhythmic hum, like the breath of the land itself. The air shimmered with the scent of incense and burning resin. Torches reflected in the still water, trembling with the slow heartbeat of time. If you were there, standing among them, you would feel no urgency, no noise of celebration, only a steady calm. The same calm that carried Osiris into the afterlife, and the same calm that has carried his memory through millennia. Even today, fragments of that myth linger quietly in our imaginations. The idea that the earth itself dies and is reborn, that light fades only to return. These are echoes of that old Egyptian wisdom. The story reminds us that endings need not frighten us. They are simply pauses in the great rhythm of being, in the slow hush of night. The myth of Osiris becomes more than a story. It becomes a lullaby, ancient, unhurried, and strangely human. A promise whispered across time, that nothing truly ends, and that love, once spoken into the silence, continues to echo long after the last breath fades. So let your mind rest for a moment in that stillness. The silence of the tomb that is not death but peace. The whisper of the river that never ceases its flow. The eternal patience of a God who waits, not in judgment, but in balance. Osiris reigns there still, quietly, eternally, beneath the stars that have watched over Egypt since the first dawn, their light flickering like the last thoughts before sleep. The wind moves quietly across the desert. Each grain of sand, tiny and golden, carries the faint memory of something ancient. For centuries, these sands have hidden the remnants of temples and tombs, the bones of forgotten rituals, and the silent faces of the gods themselves. Imagine yourself there, standing upon the edge of time, where the desert stretches endlessly warm beneath your feet, the horizon trembling in the heat. There is nothing urgent here, only stillness and the long exhale of the earth. For much of history, the stories of Egypt slept beneath this same dust. The ancient temples had fallen silent, their columns broken, their hieroglyphs unreadable to the world. Travelers who passed through spoke of strange ruins, half-buried statues, and pillars carved with mysterious symbols that no one could decipher. To them, these remnants were simply curiosities, beautiful perhaps, but mute. The gods had been forgotten, their names lost to the slow turning of centuries. But time, as it often does, circled back. The world, growing curious again, began to dig. It was not a single discovery that awakened Egypt's past, but a quiet series of moments. Hands brushing away sand, scholars copying inscriptions by lamplight, explorers sketching shadows on crumbling walls. In each action, there was a kind of reverence. The modern world, though loud and restless, paused for a moment to listen to the silence of the ancients. One of the first great awakenings came in the early 19th century when the Rosetta Stone was found, a dark slab of granodiorite carved with three scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It lay unnoticed for centuries before it was finally understood as the key to the lost language of Egypt. Imagine the scholars gathered around it, squinting in the dim light of their study, tracing the delicate grooves with cautious fingers. Each line, each symbol, was a whisper from the deep past. When Jean-François Champollion finally announced that he could read the ancient script, it was as though a long-sealed door had opened. The gods could speak again. From that moment, the sands began to yield their secrets. Tombs were uncovered, statues lifted into the sunlight for the first time in 3,000 years. And yet, even in this rediscovery, there was quiet wonder, the awe of encountering not something dead, but something eternal. The faces carved in stone still gazed with the same composure they had held when pharaohs ruled the land. Osiris, Isis, Horus, they seemed untouched by time, waiting patiently for us to remember them. Picture an archaeologist kneeling at dawn beside a half-buried doorway. The air is cool. The sky is soft pink above the desert. With a brush and a gentle hand, he clears the dust from carved symbols: wings of Isis, the crook and flail of Osiris, the falcon eye of Horus. Each mark glows faintly as the first light touches it. He pauses, hearing only the sound of wind. In that stillness across the vast distance of time, he feels connected to the hands that carved these images, to the worshippers who once left offerings here, to the slow, rhythmic pulse of the ancient Nile. This act of rediscovery was not without its quiet reverence. The early Egyptologists, though sometimes clumsy in their methods, were often moved by the grace of what they uncovered. They spoke softly of the sense of timelessness that seemed to hover in those ruins. Even in fragments, the gods retained their dignity. A broken statue of Isis still conveyed serenity. A worn relief of Osiris still radiated calm authority. It was as though the spirit of the Nile itself had preserved them, layer by layer, grain by grain. And as the century turned, Egypt's ancient world entered the modern imagination. Painters, writers, poets, all began to dream again of the gods with animal heads, of the endless procession of the afterlife, of the slow, patient march of eternity. Museums filled with artifacts, small amulets shaped like scarabs, delicate necklaces of lapis and gold, fragments of papyrus where the Book of the Dead whispered its gentle instructions for the soul's journey. Each object, however small, carried a quiet music. It sang of lives long past, of rituals performed in silence, of faith expressed not through fear, but through steady repetition. There's something soothing in that, even now. The Egyptians believed that memory itself was sacred, that to speak a name was to keep it alive. And so, when archaeologists read aloud the names of long-dead scribes and priests, they were, in a way, performing an act of resurrection. The gods, it seemed, were not jealous of this new age. They watched quietly as their stories were told once more. This time, not by worshippers, but by dreamers and historians, who approached their mysteries with pens and lanterns instead of incense and prayer. Imagine yourself again at the edge of that excavation site. The sun is rising now, turning the sand to liquid gold. Dust hangs in the air like smoke from a long-forgotten offering. You can almost hear the echo of a priest's voice, a murmur carried by the wind. The world is waking, yet part of it remains suspended in timeless stillness. In this way, archaeology becomes not a science of discovery, but of listening. It is a dialogue between the living and the long silent, spoken in the language of patience and dust. And in that silence, the gods of Egypt, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, seem to stir once more, not to rule or to punish, but simply to remind us that nothing truly disappears. It only sleeps, waiting to be remembered. When the first explorers entered the hidden tombs of Egypt, They did so with a mixture of awe and quiet fear. The air inside those chambers was still, heavy, and untouched for thousands of years. Their footsteps echoed softly, disturbing dust that had lain motionless since the time of the pharaohs. Each chamber seemed to breathe, not with life, but with memory. It was as though the walls themselves were waiting for someone to listen again. In one such tomb, deep in the Valley of the Kings, the light of a candle revealed scenes painted with extraordinary care. Figures moved across the plaster walls in calm procession. Priests, goddesses, and the eternal Osiris enthroned upon his seat of judgment. Even after centuries in darkness, the colors remained vivid. Blues like the evening sky, ochres like the desert at noon, and greens that spoke of the fertile banks of the Nile. The paint, ground from minerals and mixed with egg and honey, seemed to glow from within. To gaze upon those images was to glimpse the heartbeat of a vanished civilization. The archaeologists who uncovered them often wrote in their journals not about excitement, but about silence. They described the feeling of stepping into a space where time no longer existed, with a present moment folded gently into the past. One noted that even breathing felt like an intrusion, as if the air itself belonged to another age. There were no shouts of discovery, no rush of glory, only quiet reverence and the faint scratching of a pen recording what had been found. Soon, the discoveries multiplied. Temples were cleared of sand. Statues rose again under the steady hands of workers. And with each unearthed relic came new understanding, not of wealth or power, but of devotion. The ancient Egyptians had built their world around a deep sense of continuity. To them, the gods were not distant forces, but familiar presences, woven into every act of daily life. When archaeologists uncovered a simple offering bowl, a child's painted toy, or a faded amulet shaped like a scarab, they were not finding treasures. They were finding echoes of ordinary faith. Imagine a quiet afternoon at an excavation site. The workers have gone to rest. A lone scholar sits beneath a canvas awning, studying a fragment of papyrus. The wind moves gently through the reeds along the river. The writing upon the papyrus is delicate, its ink faded but legible. A hymn to Isis, thanking her for the protection of a household, for the safety of children, for the turning of the seasons. It is a prayer written not by a priest, but by someone very ordinary, perhaps a farmer, perhaps a mother. The words are simple, but they carry a timeless gratitude. Even now, read aloud after 3,000 years, they sound strangely human. This was one of archaeology's quiet revelations, that Egypt's myths were not only the property of kings, but the comfort of the common people. They believed that Osiris would guide the humble as surely as the mighty, that Maat, the goddess of truth, would weigh every heart with fairness. In rediscovering these beliefs, the modern world began to see ancient Egypt not as exotic spectacle, but as a civilization of astonishing tenderness and endurance. And yet, for all its newfound understanding, archaeology also awakens something else: imagination. Writers and dreamers of the 19th and early 20th centuries found themselves haunted by the calm faces of those painted gods. They filled their pages with images of forgotten temples and sleeping queens, of spirits whispering through corridors of stone. Artists drew inspiration from the precision and stillness of Egyptian art, the steady gaze, the measured proportions, the eternal posture of serenity. To them, the gods of Egypt were not frightening. They were quiet guardians of mystery. This reawakening of wonder became a kind of modern mythology. Even those who did not believe in gods found peace in the order and symbolism of Egyptian thought. The Ankh, symbol of life, appeared in jewelry. The Eye of Horus adorned books and art. The names of Isis and Osiris returned in poetry and song. A civilization that had once been forgotten now lived again, not as a relic, but as a gentle echo. Its myths flowed once more through the imagination of the world, much as the Nile flows endlessly toward the sea. In time, even the ruins themselves began to speak differently. Visitors who came to gaze upon the temples of Karnak or Luxor often spoke not of majesty, but of calm. They described the way the light shifted across the columns, the hum of insects in the air, the cool touch of stone beneath the fingertips. The same serenity that had once surrounded Osiris and Isis seemed still to linger there, patient, eternal, unmoved by centuries. Standing before those columns today, one can almost sense it still, the quiet heartbeat of the ancient world. The gods do not shout, they wait. They do not demand, they observe. Their stories, once carved in stone, now live again in our whispered retellings, in bedtime histories, in quiet documentaries, in the slow rhythm of the human voice. And so, archaeology did not merely uncover Egypt. It reminded us how to listen. If you close your eyes now, you might almost hear the faint sound of chisel against stone, the murmured prayer of a craftsman, the steady breathing of a scholar reading by lamplight. Time folds softly around you, carrying with it the same calm reverence that once filled the temples. In the hush of that moment, the gods of Egypt, gentle, silent, eternal, return to watch over the living world once more. Symbols are the quiet language of eternity. In ancient Egypt, they spoke of truths too vast for words, truths about life, death, balance, and renewal. Each line, each curve carved into stone or painted onto walls, was not just decoration. It was prayer. It was memory. It was the careful preservation of meaning in a world always shifting beneath the sun. When archaeologists brushed the sand from the first discovered amulets, they found not jewels of vanity, but small promises. A scarab, no larger than a fingertip, carved from green stone and inscribed with a single name, represented transformation. To the Egyptians, the scarab beetle, rolling its small sphere of earth across the desert, mirrored the journey of the sun across the sky. Each dawn was rebirth, each sunset, rest. To wear such an amulet was to carry that quiet assurance, that life, though fragile, would begin again. Then there was the Ankh, a simple cross with a loop at the top. In art, gods held it delicately between their fingers, offering it to mortals as if it were breath itself. Its shape, some said, resembled the key to life. Others thought it mirrored the union of sky and earth, male and female, or the handle of a mirror reflecting the eternal soul. Whatever its meaning, it endured. Even now, it remains one of the most recognizable symbols of the ancient world. A reminder, calm and unchanging, that life is continuous, that the line between beginning and ending is softer than we think. And then there is the eye of Horus, also called Wedjat, meaning the whole one. It appeared everywhere, on jewelry, on coffins, on ships and doorways. It was protection, not power, a guardian that watched gently rather than sternly. Its shape, made of graceful curves and spirals, followed the lines of harmony. Each part of the eye represented a sense: sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, and thought. To the Egyptians, it was wholeness, balance, the comfort of all things in their rightful place. Even those who could not read hieroglyphs could read this symbol. It whispered softly of safety. Imagine walking through an ancient marketplace beside the Nile. The air is warm and filled with the scent of dried herbs and honeyed bread. On the stalls before you lie dozens of amulets, ankhs of faience, scarabs of blue stone, small eyes painted onto thin slices of ivory. Each was made by hand, perhaps by someone humming an old hymn while they worked. They are not treasures in the sense of gold and silver, but in something gentler, the human desire to be remembered, to be watched over, to be held in balance by unseen hands. Even the hieroglyphs themselves were symbols of great care. Each sign carried not only sound but essence. To write the name of Osiris or Isis was to call upon their presence. That is why, in tombs and temples, names were enclosed in cartouches, ovals that protected the written soul from decay. To erase a name was to condemn it to silence. To write it anew was to breathe life once more. When archaeologists first began to read these words, They found themselves drawn not only to the meaning, but to the rhythm of the writing. Hieroglyphs flow in harmony, never hurried. They can face left or right, always guiding the reader's eyes gently toward what is sacred. The figures, birds' eyes, hands, waves, suns, move with a slow, deliberate grace. Even on broken walls, the balance remains. The Egyptians understood something about peace, that it is not found in stillness alone, but in symmetry, in the measured repetition of beauty. Over centuries, these symbols have drifted quietly into the modern world. We find them on jewelry, in art, on doorways and book covers. They appear not as curiosities, but as whispers, fragments of an older understanding that life is cyclical, that what fades will rise again. They are reminders that calm is not emptiness, but connection. Consider, too, how the Egyptian gods were often shown with the bodies of humans and the heads of animals. To us, it seems strange, a falcon-headed man, a lioness, a jackal. But to the people who carved them, this was harmony. Each form expressed a quality of nature. The vision of the falcon, the strength of the bull, the grace of the cat. There is no division between the human and the natural, no separation between the sacred and the ordinary. Everything breathed with the same divine rhythm. In this way, Egypt's symbols were more than images. They were bridges between the mortal and the divine, between sleep and waking, between the living world and the silence beyond. They were not meant to startle the senses, but to steady them, a soft pulse beneath the surface of belief. If you look closely at one of those ancient carvings, the ankh, the eye, the scarab, you may notice how smooth the edges are, how the stone has been worn by centuries of touch. Perhaps those who came before us held them as we might hold a smooth pebble or a strand of beads, not for meaning alone, but for comfort. Even gods, after all, were companions in the long, quiet hours between sunset and dawn. And so, as we uncover these symbols again in museums and books and quiet corners of imagination, they continue their work. They steady the spirit. They remind us, gently, that beauty can survive the fall of empires. That peace, once carved into stone, does not vanish. It only sleeps, waiting for light. Power in ancient Egypt did not shout. It glided. It moved slowly, like the Nile itself, steady and unbroken. For the pharaoh and those who serve in his court, life was not a flurry of noise or constant activity. It was ritual, precise, graceful, and measured. A world where every gesture carried meaning. Every silence was a kind of speech. Imagine the palace at dawn. Before the city stirs, the horizon glows pale gold, and the courtyards are still cool from the night air. Servants move in near silence, sweeping the polished stone floors, lighting small oil lamps. The scent of myrrh drifts through open corridors. Somewhere deep within the palace, the pharaoh awakens. He is not alone. Attendants are already there, priests of the morning, their linen robes pure and uncreased. They help him bathe in cool water drawn from sacred wells, believed to be touched by the river's divine breath. He is dressed in crisp white linen, layered with fine gold and colored stones, not as ornament, but as symbol, each hue representing a quality of the gods he embodies. Blue for creation and eternity, gold for divine light, red for the lifeblood of protection. The ceremony of the morning is quiet but deliberate. The pharaoh does not hurry. He stands before small statues of the gods, offering incense and prayer. He speaks not loudly, but with calm authority, repeating words that have been spoken for hundreds of years. Affirmations that he is the living Horus, the bridge between heaven and earth. To rule in Egypt was not to command, but to maintain ma'at, balance, order, the still center around which all life turns. When the sun finally rises, its light spills across the palace terraces, catching on carved columns shaped like lotus flowers. The air warms. Musicians begin to play gentle tunes on flutes and harps. Petitioners, scribes, and officials gather in the audience halls, waiting in silence until they are called. The pharaoh appears, calm as the morning itself, and the hum of daily business begins. Court life was an intricate rhythm. Each hour, each task, each ritual moved according to pattern. Even the most mundane matters, taxes, harvest reports, the appointment of temple overseers, were steeped in ceremony. Documents were unrolled, read aloud in steady tones, sealed with soft clay, and pressed with the mark of royal authority. The voice of the pharaoh might be heard only briefly, perhaps to approve or to question. His words were measured, never wasted. It was said that to speak before him was to stand before eternity. Around him moved the viziers, high priests, and noble families. They were the keepers of order, the living embodiment of stability. Their garments were pristine, their speech formal yet soothing. They served not through ambition, but through repetition, through the daily maintenance of the divine rhythm. It was, in its way, a kind of devotion. Within the inner halls of the palace, murals told the story of gods and kings intertwined. Pharaohs offering gifts to Ra, kneeling before Isis, embracing Osiris. These images were not flattery. They were reminders. To rule Egypt was to live constantly in dialogue with the divine. Every decision, every law, every moment of stillness had to reflect cosmic balance. And so, the pharaoh's court was not filled with shouts or laughter, but with a kind of serene diligence. The sound of styluses scratching on papyrus, the murmur of priests reciting sacred texts, the rustle of linen garments moving along cool stone. Even the echo of footsteps seemed to align with the rhythm of devotion. Outside the palace, the city thrived. Farmers brought offerings, merchants delivered goods, artists and builders worked in the sun. But within those walls, time itself slowed. The pace of the divine dictated the pace of the court. Every sunrise mirrored the first sunrise of creation. Every act of judgment echoed the cosmic laws first spoken by the gods. At night, when the air cooled and torches flickered against painted columns, the palace took on a softer sound. The day's work was complete. Officials retired to quiet chambers to copy records or study sacred writings. The pharaoh, again purified by ritual, would be offered food and wine. Music played softly in the background. Sometimes he would walk the terraces, watching the moon reflected in the waters of the Nile below. To him, the world was not a realm to conquer, but a garden to tend. Power, after all, was fragile, a thread woven between heaven and earth, sustained by reverence and order. In such a world, there was comfort in constancy. Each sunrise and sunset promised the same rituals, the same prayers, the same unchanging rhythm. The people, watching from afar, believed their pharaoh's calm ensured the world's calm. As long as he rose each morning to greet the gods, the river would flow, the crops would grow, and the stars would keep their courses. That belief, soft as it may seem, was the true foundation of empire. To imagine this world is to slow down, to feel the weight of gold not as wealth, but as symbol, to hear the hush of sandals on polished floors, the low hum of sacred chants drifting upward. In those moments, you begin to understand how a civilization could endure for thousands of years, not through war or conquest, but through quiet devotion to balance, to ritual, and to peace. If the pharaoh was the sun, then the priests were the rays that carried his light across the land. They were not kings, and yet they held power of a subtler kind, the authority of ritual, of knowledge, of continuity. Through them, Egypt spoke to its gods, and the gods, in turn, whispered back. The life of a priest was ruled by rhythm, not ambition. Each day began before dawn, when the horizon was still a cool band of silver and the air smelled faintly of the river. They would rise in silence, wash in cold water to purify the body, and dress in fresh linen garments. No thread could be torn, no fold unclean. Hair was shaved, jewelry forbidden. They moved through the temple not as individuals, but as vessels of order, unseen, almost anonymous, as if their very presence should not disturb the balance of sacred space. Imagine the great temple of Karnak, its columns rising like a forest of stone. In the half-light, torches flicker, and the faint hum of chanting fills the halls. The sound is low, repetitive, not music for the ears, but for the spirit. Priests walk in procession, their feet bare upon the polished floor. They carry offerings, bowls of milk, bread, flowers, small jars of fragrant oils. Each step, each word, each movement has been practiced so many times that it feels effortless, timeless. They are not performing, they're maintaining. They keep the world in balance. The rituals themselves were ancient, unchanging, and deeply precise. At the heart of every temple was a sanctuary, a dark, enclosed space that held the statue of a god. Only the high priest could enter it, and only after cleansing himself with water and incense. Once inside, he did what might seem simple. He washed the statue, anointed it with oils, dressed it in fine linen, and presented it with food. Then he closed the doors, sealing the god's presence again within silence. To modern eyes, it might look like caretaking. To the Egyptians, it was creation renewed. Each morning ritual was a rebirth of the world. Outside the sanctuary, scribes worked quietly beside low tables. Their tools were delicate: reed pens, pots of ink, sheets of papyrus. Their hands moved steadily, recording temple inventories, donations, the phases of the moon, and the names of those who brought offerings. Every detail mattered. To write something incorrectly was to disturb Ma'at, the cosmic balance. So they wrote with care, in slow, deliberate lines, their work a kind of meditation. The whisper of the pen was a prayer of its own. Temples were not only places of worship. They were centers of learning, wealth, and governance. The priests maintained the calendar, studied the stars, and recorded the flooding of the Nile. They managed grain stores, coordinated workers, and ensured that taxes flowed smoothly from the farms to the royal treasury. In their order, the empire found stability. They were both scientists and spiritual stewards, guiding Egypt's rhythm with gentle precision. To become a priest was to step away from the noise of ordinary life. They lived within temple walls or in quiet dwellings nearby. Their meals were plain: bread, beer, vegetables, sometimes fish or fruit. They avoided excess, avoided contact with what was unclean or impure. Their joy was not in luxury, but in repetition, in the serenity of doing what had been done for centuries before. There was peace in that sameness. Each sunrise brought the same duties, each sunset the same closure. And in that repetition, they believed, lay eternity. For the high priests, the work carried immense responsibility. They were the interpreters of divine will, reading omens in the stars, or in the flight of birds above the temples. When the pharaoh sought guidance, it was the high priest who stood beside him, calm and deliberate, translating silence into counsel. It was said that the gods spoke not in thunder, but in subtleties, the alignment of stars, the outcome of dreams, the whisper of wind through the reeds. To listen to such voices required patience, humility, and the ability to find stillness even in the heart of complexity. Some priests specialized in the care of the dead. They prepared bodies for burial, wrapped them in linen, and recited long hymns of protection. But even this act, though connected to death, was not grim. It was another form of continuation, another gesture of order. In tending to the departed, they maintained the bridge between the worlds, ensuring that peace extended beyond life itself. The temple complex, with its libraries and workshops, was like a small city within a city. Potters shaped ritual vessels. Jewelers repaired sacred ornaments. Scribes copied hymns onto fresh papyrus. Every corner hummed with quiet diligence. No one hurried. No one shouted. It was a world of calm industry, bound together by devotion and the certainty of purpose. At sunset, the final prayers echoed through the halls. The priests extinguished the lamps, closed the great doors of the sanctuary, and sealed them with clay and rope. Outside, the desert wind rose, carrying faint traces of incense. Stars began to appear, one by one, over the temple roof. For a moment, the whole complex seemed to breathe, a slow exhale at the end of another perfect day of order. In this stillness, It's easy to understand why Egypt endured for so long. Its strength was not found in conquest alone, but in the quiet devotion of those who believed that maintaining harmony, no matter how small the gesture, sustained the world itself. To light a lamp, to polish a statue, to draw a single line of hieroglyph. All these were acts of faith, performed not for spectacle, but for peace. And as night deepens around the temple, you might imagine the sound of the river nearby, slow, constant, eternal, moving just as it did thousands of years ago. The same rhythm, the same calm. The work of the priests may have ended for the day, but their presence lingers still in the quiet balance of things. In the world of ancient Egypt, death was not an ending. It was a continuation, a doorway opening onto another room of existence, one remarkably similar to the one left behind. For the elite, for priests and nobles and pharaohs alike, the preparation for that passage began long before the final breath. It was not a matter of dread, but of quiet precision, an art, a duty, and a form of peace. Imagine a nobleman in the twilight of his life. He sits in a shaded courtyard, the soft breeze carrying the scent of lotus blossoms. The Nile glimmers nearby, calm and familiar. Scribes sit close by, ready to record his final wishes. There is no fear in his voice, no tremor in his hands. He speaks slowly, with the same rhythm he used in life, steady, deliberate, ensuring that all will continue in proper order once he is gone. In Egypt, to die was to return to Ma'at, the great balance. Every soul, rich or poor, would stand before Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. But for the elite, there were steps to take before that meeting. Their tombs were built not as monuments of pride, but as homes, eternal dwellings filled with objects they would need in the next life. Furniture, clothing, food, scrolls, and miniature servants known as Ushabti were placed carefully within. Each item had a purpose, a role to play in the quiet continuation of existence. The walls of these tombs were not bare. They told stories, drawn in color and light. Scenes of gardens and banquets, musicians and servants, rivers and fields. Each image was a prayer of memory, a promise that the pleasures of life would endure beyond the veil. When you look upon them now, faded but still serene, you can almost sense the calm belief that shaped them. The afterlife was not distant or abstract. It was simply the next morning after a long night's rest. For the pharaoh, death carried a deeper significance. His body would be prepared by priests, his organs placed in canopic jars guarded by divine figures. He would be wrapped in linen layer upon layer, each bound with amulets and charms, not as a spectacle, but as a safeguard. Each binding whispered a blessing, each charm a quiet reminder that even kings must pass through darkness before reaching light. The air of the embalming chamber was cool, the torches dim, the work deliberate. It was not morbid. It was meticulous, sacred. Once sealed within his tomb, the pharaoh's soul began its journey. Texts inscribed on the walls, the pyramid texts, later the Book of the Dead, served as a guide, a gentle map of eternity. They spoke of gates and guardians, of trials that were not battles, but rituals of recognition. The heart would be weighed against the feather of truth. If found pure, it would pass freely into the field of reeds, a perfect reflection of Egypt itself, fertile, peaceful, eternal. The same river flowed there, the same stars shone above. Life continued, calm and unbroken. The living, too, took comfort in this order. Families visited tombs on feast days, bringing offerings of bread and beer, flowers and incense. They spoke to their ancestors softly, leaving notes or prayers written on fragments of pottery. These were called letters to the dead, small acts of remembrance, written with affection and faith. The dead, they believed, could hear, could guide, could comfort. And so, the bond between life and death remained gentle, unsevered. For the priests, overseeing these rituals was a sacred trust. They were keepers of transition, ensuring that no soul entered the afterlife unprepared or unloved. Their voices echoed through tomb corridors, reciting hymns that lulled the living and guided the dead. Each syllable was soft, steady, like the movement of the Nile itself. In their prayers, there was no urgency, only assurance. Everything would continue as it always had. Even in the grandeur of the Valley of the Kings, where tombs stretch deep into the living rock, there is stillness. The air is thick with time. Walls painted thousands of years ago remain luminous, their pigments faded but not gone. Figures of gods and pharaohs gaze out in calm perpetuity. To stand there, even now, is to feel the rhythm of devotion that never ceased, the heartbeat of a civilization that found eternity not in glory, but in peace. Consider the artisans who carved those walls. They worked in teams, often father beside son, their days quiet and repetitive. They lived in simple homes in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, far from the court's noise. Each morning they descended into the tombs, chisels in hand, and continued the same precise motions. Their goal was not fame, not recognition, but accuracy, to carve each curve of a hieroglyph with reverence. For them, eternity was measured in the quality of a line, the grace of a figure, the harmony of proportion. And so, through hands and hearts, through devotion and detail, Egypt's elite left behind more than monuments. They left behind a philosophy of peace, a belief that the universe itself was sustained through balance, care, and calm. Even death bowed to that rhythm. The world might change, the sands might shift, but Ma'at, the quiet order of existence, would always endure. In that silence of eternity, the gods watch. The stars gleam softly above the valley, their light unchanged for thousands of years. The river still flows, carrying reflections of temples and tombs. And somewhere beneath the sand, wrapped in linen and memory, the pharaoh sleeps, not as a ruler forgotten, but as a soul at rest, surrounded by symbols of continuity. For the Egyptians, that was the true reward, to be remembered, to remain part of the rhythm, to exist forever in peace. And now, as our long journey through ancient Egypt draws to a close, the desert night grows deep around us. The torches have burned low, the halls are quiet, and the Nile moves in its endless rhythm. The same rhythm that has carried gods and kings, priests and farmers, through thousands of years of silence. You've walked through temples and tombs, heard the murmur of prayers, watched the slow unfolding of ritual and myth. You've seen how the Egyptians, in their calm devotion, wove eternity into every gesture, every word, every stone they carved. They did not seek immortality through noise or conquest, but through stillness, through the precise repetition of order, the daily affirmation that life continues. The myths of their gods, Isis and Osiris, Horus and Anubis, Hathor and Are, are more than stories. They are reflections of our own quiet hopes, that what we love might endure, that balance might return after loss, that every sunset promises a dawn. Even now, thousands of years later, their symbols remain, the ink, the scarab, the eye, gentle reminders that nothing truly ends, it only changes form. Imagine yourself standing once more on the riverbank at dusk. The water glows faintly gold beneath the fading light. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell sounds, low and melodic. Palm leaves stir, and the air is warm and still. You breathe deeply, feeling the same air that once filled those ancient halls, carrying the same quiet promise of continuity. As the stars appear, one by one, their reflections dance across the water like thoughts drifting into dreams. You can almost hear the whisper of the old language, soft, steady, timeless, speaking of peace, of balance, of rest. The gods are silent now, but their silence is not empty. It is full of meaning, full of calm. And here, in this stillness, you too can rest. Let the centuries fold around you like linen, soft and weightless. Let the sound of the river carry you deeper into sleep, where stories become dreams and dreams become memory. You are safe, you are still, and the world, ancient and eternal, is at peace. If this story has helped you find that peace, even a little, Feel free to leave a like or subscribe to Sleepy Historian, but only if it truly brings you rest. Tell me softly in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to imagine others across the world drifting to sleep to the same old tales, the same boring history for sleep, the same quiet rhythm of the past. So close your eyes now. Let go of the day, of the noise, of everything that demands to be remembered. Somewhere in the dark, the river still flows. The gods still watch, and time, as always, moves gently onward. Good night, traveler, and may your dreams be as calm as the eternal sands of Egypt.